Hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode of The Negotiation. In this episode, we speak with Jeff Daggett, founder and CEO of Eyes On, a brand and retail development and management company offering brand, retail, hospitality, and licensing management services and representation in Japan and the United States. Since 2002, Eyes On has assisted a number of big-name retail brands such as Apple, Columbia Sportswear, Nordstrom, Shinjuku Takano, and NBC Universal. Jeff's background includes over 3 decades of experience at leading global companies in the Asia Pacific, specifically in investment banking, real estate, retail operations, merchandising, marketing, and general management. This episode is part 1 of 2 with Jeff, in which we cover topics like what it was like launching Gap in Japan back in 1994 and recruiting its first management team there, how Levi's became an iconic global brand. We discussed Jeff's involvement in Nike's first ever campaign to go global that originated in Japan, as well as how Nike does retail differently than other top brands. And we finished this episode talking about Sephora's restructuring in Japan and reversing declining year-on-year store sales in under 6 months. Enjoy.
To use an analogy in coming to Japan, in drinking the tea, you don't want to lose sight of who you are and try to become so good at tea ceremony. You're never going to out Japanese the Japanese. You're never going to out Chinese the Chinese. You come as you and you bring what you bring. And so the thing that I think made Gap successful and that Gap was really good about recognizing was to come with the product it had. Did it adapt? Absolutely. Everyone who's in apparel knows you change specs. There's a list of things that you amend to succeed in the market that you're coming to. But it was really important that the essence of the brand stay the essence of the brand, because that's what customers were going and then did come to the stores for.
Home to over 4 billion people, the Asia-Pacific region boasts one of the most powerful consumer markets on the planet. Not only is it home to half of the world's under 30 population, but it's also home to more than half the world's internet users. It's a market that no globally minded organization should ignore. But entering markets like China, Japan, or Southeast Asia is no easy task. Just ask the likes of Microsoft, Google, Uber, and Facebook. However, times are changing, and with the right partners, doors are slowly opening as more and more companies find success growing their key markets in APAC. I myself spent 8 years in China, mostly as a venture capitalist, helping early-stage tech companies grow in the Asia-Pacific market successfully. This show is dedicated to uncovering and examining successful Asia market entry and growth strategies by interviewing the experts who've done it before and truly understand what it takes to be successful in the region. My name is Todd Embley, and welcome to The Negotiation.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to The Negotiation. My name is Todd Embley, and I am the host. And I'm excited to welcome Jeff Daggett, founder and CEO of Eyes On. Jeff, welcome to the show.
Todd, I'm really happy to be here with you.
Yeah, me too. Happy to have you. Let's quickly put you on the map. Where are you right now that we're recording you from?
Well, as you might be able to see in the background, this is actually downtown Tokyo. This is actually the view out my window. I'm in Hito, right next to Adisawa Park. For anyone familiar with Tokyo, that's like just down the street from Roppongi, pretty much in the middle of the loop line.
Right on. How long have you lived there?
Off and on for over 30 years. I first came in 82 and then came again in 85 and then came again in 94 and really haven't left since 94. So I've just dated myself.
I know that's I do it all the time too. Trust me, it just happens. I'm sure the audience is totally fine with that, but that's a long time. That's quite a tenure in in another country. So this is going to be fascinating. You've done a lot. You have seen a lot. You've experienced a lot of things macroeconomically that have like on up and down and fluctuated. A lot of companies have come and companies have gone and technology has come and really just stayed around. So yeah, let's dive into that first. And let's start with a quick introduction to the work that you're doing now.
So right now with Eyes On, I spend a lot of time helping businesses come to Japan. And now as the yen grows a little weaker, I'm spending more time helping some of my Japanese friends find markets outside of Japan. My background's primarily in apparel. So I'm really doing a lot in what they call soft lines, but because of my licensing background, I'm serving as licensing agent for a few small media businesses as well, pretty much the core.
Nice. Okay. Yeah. And we are going to dive into some of that apparel right after I ask you a question, maybe personally. How did you end up in Japan? And I know it was a few times,
yes.
But walk us through, how'd you end up there? Why'd you go back? Why'd you stay?
I happily backed into it. My life is a series of happy plan Bs. Grew up in and still have a house in and go back as often as I can to a little town called Placerville, California. That's between Lake Tahoe and Sacramento in Northern California, for anyone not familiar. And in growing up, my heroes and the folks who were kind of pillars of the community were, they were doctors, lawyers, CPAs. I looked at how long it would take to get through school for all of those, and thought I was making the expedient choice and deciding to become an accountant. But about into my sophomore year of college and burning out in cost accounting courses, which I was taking without context because I hadn't had a lot of business experience, I felt the need to take what I think in other places is called a gap year. So I had some friends in the dormitory, Japanese friends, Korean friends, and in discussing with different folks, an acquaintance of mine got me a position in Japan teaching English. And a lot of us come to Asia that way. And it's a great way to get to know the customer because you're with them and you think you're teaching them, but they are absolutely teaching you. And so I spent a year and the thing that helped me was it was my first year in Japan. I was the youngest instructor at the English school I was working at. So I got all the classes no one else wanted. So I was sent to Kawasaki Steel because you had to leave the school to teach that course. And I was sent to Fuji Oil and I had to leave the school to teach that course. It was in a 30-minute train ride to go down and, teaching the division managers in charge of shutdown maintenance for the refinery, real hardcore. We're the guys that, rebuilt or built Japan. And so again, here I am thinking I'm teaching, and I do believe I was able to make some contribution in teaching my native language, but I absolutely sponged the kind of like the value system and the way folks. I remember at one point confiding with this one bucho or division manager that I was teaching at Fuji Oil that I was taking accounting and I was burnt out a little bit. And he goes, you can hire accountants, and it was kind of like mind blown, kind of, which has turned out to be a really good thing because all the folks who've worked with me in finance know that that I absolutely need all the professionals around me I can get in finance and everything else. By the way.
Let me ask you another question. You've been there a long time. How's your Japanese?
I would call it fluent, but understand as a native speaker, it's the work of a lifetime. And even through COVID here, I would have to say my English has also fallen off dramatically. As a result, I've just gotten back together with an old Japanese TV producer friend that I met like 30 years ago on a project. And we started up a small project. He goes, Jeff, your Japanese sucks. And I think he's right. I mean, we're having that conversation in Japanese, but his point being, I could be better. When I speak Japanese, no doubt I am framing or initiating my thoughts in an English sentence structure. And even though I'm speaking Japanese, it's not quite the way someone who had just come up through the Japanese school system would speak, no doubt.
I think that there's a measure of success that you can take away from somebody telling you that your Japanese or your Mandarin sucks.
Yes.
Because for a very long time, people are generally understanding that the assumption and the knowledge apparently is that you are not very good. It sucks. And then, and so they just appreciate that you're trying because they can see that you're trying and fumbling. And then you get to a point where it really does seem like the language, and then they can say, wow, it's really not very good.
Yes.
Without the context of how much accolades it took, along the way to get to it actually sucks.
Yeah.
So worthwhile pointing out. Okay. You took a gap year. Funny enough, ended up at the Gap. So let's dive into your work in Japan with the Gap. It was just under 3 years. You were launching Gap in Japan. And I just want to know what that experience was like between, in the areas of 94 and 95.
It was an incredible experience. I came out of graduate school, managed through some acquaintances at Mitsui Fudosan who had some inkling that Gap was interested in going to Japan to get an interview with Don Fisher. And this was in late 1991, maybe early could have even been early 1992. And his first interview question, which I've always used when I'm working in retail ever since, is, can you see yourself working in the stores? Because for anyone in retail, this, the store is company headquarters, and company headquarters is back office. So it's really important to understand in that business how product comes in, gets on the floor, how it leaves in a customer's shopping bag. Obviously, now we're doing a lot of this digitally, but the concept is the same. And knowing that, I was really lucky in that interview, because I was later told that a lot of folks, looking for jobs in strategy or something like that in retail will kind of miss that and say, no, I was actually thinking of working in your headquarters, which again is back office. I said, absolutely. So he said, no promises, but in his office, he picked the phone up, called a local store manager and said, you do not have to hire this person, but I'm going to send him to you. And if you can use him, see how he does. And so I started on the floor, seasonal hire, $6.50 an hour. Now, we knew that there would be, other opportunities. And so I learned a lot. I learned to show up. I learned to be on time, learned to pick things up off the floor. Had to be taught to see an empty hanger on the wall, because I'd walk by it until someone taught me to make that distinction. All the things that you retail pros out there already know, I learned on the floor. And then after a couple months of establishing trust and actually touring a few of the potential Japanese partners through the stores, got my first consulting job with them. So I actually started in the headquarters concurrently as working at $6.50 an hour as a seasonal hire in the store, which I did not stop doing, was working in headquarters as a consultant and working with, actually every Tuesday, I would go in to meet with Don Fisher, because the Japan expansion was very much his baby. And we built the business plan. So I want to be clear that I was a part of starting the business of Gap in Japan, right. But it was a team effort. And I should probably better characterize my role on my resume at that point as being scribe, because I kind of talked to everyone and pulled the plan together.
Fair to say that was your first professional role outside of teaching at a brand in Japan?
Yes. Yeah. I had a stint at Nomura Securities as an analyst. That taught me a lot. But my first actual role at a brand, building a business, was at the Gap, and I am eternally grateful to them.
Okay, so when you were there in the early days, what did you think that you were doing well, and maybe some things that you got wrong?
I think the things that the Gap did well was just being the Gap. So particularly up until that point, most businesses in Japan were still coming over with a partner, like a trading company partner or a large retail partner, and they were done through joint ventures. We had the good fortune to, my boss at the time, Bill Fisher, knew Steve Burke at the Disney store well. They were on good terms, and the Disney store had just opened in Japan, and they were one of the first U.S. retailers to open in Japan, independent of any partner. And the Gap, the Gap team also felt, it was really important to go direct. There were several partners that the Gap talked to, but in the end, the decision was to open direct. And in the process of coming to Japan at any time, not even that time, years later, I had the opportunity to help some of the Apple folks as they were getting ready to open Japan. And a lot of folks will tell you, you have to change what you're doing to succeed in Japan or wherever you go. And this is true, but you can't lose the essence of what you are. To use an analogy in coming to Japan, in drinking the tea, you don't want to lose sight of who you are, and try to become so good at tea ceremony. You're never going to out Japanese the Japanese. You're never going to out Chinese the Chinese. You come as you, and you bring what you bring. And so the thing that I think made Gap successful, and the Gap was really good about recognizing, was to come with the product it had. Did it adapt? Absolutely. Everyone who's in apparel knows you change specs. There's a list of things that you amend to succeed in the market that you're coming to. But it was really important that that the essence of the brand stay the essence of the brand, because that's what customers were going and then did come to the stores for.
In that area of the world where you were essentially cutting your teeth on understanding it, do you have any examples of experiences, learnings, and growth in yourself that you took from that role into subsequent roles?
Patience. Definitely became a better listener as one's Japanese partners were explaining what typically needed to be done to be successful in Japan. We would spend a lot of time listening to that. We were fortunate to, before Gap went to Japan, it had a program called the International Sales Program. So it already had some experience selling its products in Japan. At the time, the products were sold through a really old and well-established denim trading company here called Eiko Shoji. And the Takahashi family that ran that business was just amazing in the advice they gave on what modifications needed to be done to product, and learn to listen, learn to respect. There's of course, we always want to be disruptive, but a lot of times the best way to be disruptive is the move gradual and then suddenly method. And so, in that sense, although the Gap came to Japan, the initial moves were slow. There was one store, then there were two stores, and there were three stores, and then of course, the format, the business formula is then proven. All of your real estate partners are now trusting you. They understand that you can do what you can do. You have trained staff, and then you move more quickly. So that element of patience and being willing to be methodical and not dinging yourself because in year one you haven't opened 30 stores. It's important to be realistic in a rollout.
So at that time, of course, this is pre-e-commerce. So the brick and mortar, those retail locations, the choices made around those, that's what I want to explore right now. So as you're growing, I'm curious as to what kind of decision-making rubrics were in place when you were looking at brick and mortar and retail there in a place like Japan.
The trade-offs in opening are always, do you go to the suburbs where it's easier to get locations and open quicker, or do you open that choice flagship location at the center of town despite the time, effort, and expense that's going to take? And at the time, still conventional wisdom was that you really needed to open your first store in a real flagship like location. That's news. That's what gets you your PR. And more importantly, it's what the Japanese industry at the time looked to as a kind of a marker of a business that understood how to do things right. And so Gap worked very hard and was very fortunate to have a couple kind of champions actually in Japanese department stores. So Gap's first landlord was a Hankyu department store actually in the Ginza. So because Hankyu controlled space right across from the Sony flagship building in Ginza, and because they were willing to put Gap in there, that really gave Gap a chance to start from Ginza, so that when it was ready to open its next store out in the suburban but still very important area of Futogo Tamagawa, that store didn't look like it had opened first, and that maybe Gap didn't know how to open stores in Japan according to what was conventional wisdom at the time. The wonderful thing about conventional wisdom is someone will come along and change it for us, and sometimes we'll do it ourselves. But at the time, that was the conventional wisdom, and it was really thanks to Hankyu department store for that first location. The third location was Isetan in Shinjuku, putting a Gap store on the second floor in Isetan there, and those were also kind of stamps of approval or of a business knowing how to do business in Japan. And at that time, I think that really helped Gap get started.
What about things like negotiating space or contracts or price? What was it like going through those processes in Japan?
At Gap was really fortunate to have a really good development team. Don Fish himself, having come from a real estate background, that was really part of the heart of the operations of Gap. And there was another real estate development professional that came in and did that. But I did learn a lot observing him do those negotiations. I think that Gap was fortunate in that there was a lot of interest in having Gap come in. So my recollection now is that there wasn't a lot of convincing that needed to be done, particularly after, lining up Ginza Hankyu and Hidesaburo Matsuda, the then managing director of Hankyu, kind of, having given Gap a seal of approval by providing space in Ginza. I think that also in turn helped a lot of the other conversations to go more smoothly.
I know e-commerce, we all know e-commerce has drastically impacted and changed retail, but wanted to maybe just tie off the conversation around Gap here, just asking if you think just really around retail, which isn't dead, it's still alive, would those conversations have changed just from what you said about, and I think back to those times, I think there was, correct me if I'm wrong, but an allure to foreign brands, because I just don't know if the world was as global in product and retail as much as it is today. And I've thought that there was an aspect of not rolling out the red carpet, but like a really wanting to expand the city's image as being truly global. That's a part of it. So you get some treatment that goes along with that. Now, if you're going and you're looking to do expand retail and brick and mortar, would things have changed? Would relationship management and negotiations have changed?
I think so. I think it's a lot harder now to make the case for, it can be done, but to make the case for how you're different. But it's never easy to do that. That's always the challenge. And even for Gap in the beginning, there were ahead of Gap opening in Japan from 1994, 95 onwards, the Gap really put in the legwork from 1992. So from and even before that, when I was able to start with the Gap's international division, I inherited a filing cabinet of over 10 years of inquiries from Japan, just on Banana Republic, for example. So there was already a lot of interest in, Gap as a company, then the Gap brands, but Gap still spent a couple years making its case. Spent time with Nobukazu Muto, who at the time was the managing director of Visiton, and he and his New York office lead who spent 3 days just touring stores and explaining how the Gap merchandise model worked. Department stores generally have a twice a year markdown cycle, and we were explaining how it, kind of similar to more what we see in e-commerce today, how there were multiple drops across the course of a year and constantly marking down, constantly checking to see what's not working and marking that down, moving it to clearance, something that the department store model in Japan at the time was not set up to do. But that was I think that aspect also was very attractive to Mr. Muto and his team. So, we did spend a lot of time making that case. Today, you still have to make that case. I think it's harder. Mostly because the Japanese consumer is what we call, I now call it post consumer. We kind of went from consumer to post consumer, where no one had to have that LVMH bag, not had to have the bag, and now we're in a place where if Gucci does a really cool Doraemon collaboration, well, that's interesting. I'll get that. But there's no, in Japan now, relatively speaking, because there are cohorts who, still that Gucci bag or LVMH bag is exactly the social signal that the brands expect and need them to be. But there's a much larger cohort here in Japan that's willing to go, yeah, but amaze me. So that's, I think, part of the challenge that we have here in Japan right now is you need to have a different, and very exciting story. The bright point of all this, though, is a wise retail strategist once told me there are no overstored markets, only under merchandised ones. Meaning, no matter what we do, we always have an opportunity to get, and it's storytelling, compelling product, attractively priced, well merchandised, including, visual merchandise, whether it's on that is still always the opportunity, and it's always in front of us. So, I would not discourage anyone from, coming and being, the next blockbuster business in Japan or anywhere.
Last question on the Gap and your time there. You also initiated recruitment for the first management team for Gap Japan. Just wondering if you could speak to a few of the key principles that you were using when you approached that task.
Frankly, my first heavy recruiting opportunity was when I moved to Levi's, because at the time I came over with Japan, I was working for a country lead, and I was his director of operations. So the role I had was more of helping and talking to, but the decision was really made, and as it should have been, by the country manager. But again, it was looking for people who had the linguistic ability, because we were not fully operating in Japanese at the time. We were still operating in English, and still had a huge team back in San Francisco that needed to be communicated with. So obviously it was language ability. It was, serviceability, and those sorts of things.
After the Gap, as you mentioned, you went to Levi's. And just so people can start chalking up the resume notches. Then you went to Nike. And just for time, I think we should just jump straight into the time at Nike as well. And the first question out of the gate with regards to Nike that I wanted to ask was based on really how well Nike has done globally for so long. They're just an iconic brand, and they're iconic globally. I wanted to just understand maybe a little bit and have you just spend a minute talking about what it is that they really, really do well that gives them that sustainability around being an iconic brand. What are they doing better than anybody else, and how they've managed to maintain that or sustain that, in your opinion? And then how did you see that manifest and be able to continue upon entering Japan?
So I had the opportunity to join Nike right in the middle of the Just Do It years, and I think that kind of encapsulates the attractiveness. No matter where you go, there's this can-do spirit, that, and everything aspirational. Nike clearly uses amazing aspirational athletes to tell the story, and at the same time, always lets every customer know, anyone with at the time we used to talk a lot, anyone with a body is an athlete. This too is you in your way, in your life. So it was aspirational and accessible at the same time. And I think that's really important. It's understandable that one always wants to go for the aspirational, but in doing that, it's important to not get too far ahead of the customer or use role models that may seem aspirational, but maybe turn out to be because they're just too out of reach. So like, for example, in Japan was very careful to use athletes here and, local baseball players, and like Nakata, who's a very well-known footballer for American soccer player. Obviously right now, Naomi Osaka is in the news. At the time, we had this amazing aspirational tennis player called Ai Sugiyama. She was amazing and a role model for whether you were a man or a woman. Just her stick-to-itiveness on the court was, that all of these things kind of combined, with, the way Nike and Nike's longtime, marketing partners at Wieden and Kennedy, again, great storytellers, were always able to, put together, a compelling story for why, even though there's no finish line, we're going to still cross it today.
Obviously, Nike has had a ton of star athletes represent the brand. And I think you're absolutely right that that's been a big deal. That's been really, really important. You alluded to also a little bit of the localization of that strategy. Michael Jordan, Tiger Woods, these guys are going to do a lot for the brand inside Japan. But you can't forget to make the brand seem a little bit more familiar and something achievable is to bring in the local star athletes as well. And as you said, it was, and I'll just jump straight to it. I know that those endorsement deals were a big part of the success that they had in the Japanese market. Is this still the case, in your opinion, for sports and fitness brands that are looking to grow in Japan?
Definitely, yes. But what you may choose as an aspirational model after you look at what everyone else is doing around you, it might be a handful of influencers. It could be a few entrepreneurs that have started that, new, really cool athletics app. Definitely, you can still get the big baseball player. Right now in our era, in Japan, everyone's gaga over, Ohtani, just like he pitches, he hits. Is like, wait,
Shohei Ohtani.
His Babe Ruth come back.
He might be the best baseball player that they've ever seen.
Absolutely, you cannot beat that, and brands absolutely, where they can, associate with that. But depending on what your brand story is and your positioning, there are still ways to, be even more accessible. There are a lot of small success stories. You find someone who started a new marathon here and feature them, or as a sports brand, you really do have a lot of options, and it's up to you where you want to tell the story and how you want to tell the story. And as long as I believe, this is my belief, it's an opinion, as long as it's aspirational and accessible. And I think that's key. Ohtani's great, but one could argue, how accessible is he? Let's be honest, which of us is really going to be an Ohtani or in an earlier area, a Michael Jordan? There's one of those. Ideally, you even combine those if you can afford an Ohtani and then tell a lot of local stories, which I think Nike did really well and does really well.
You had a hand in that, in how well they do these.
I was a participant.
You were a participant. We are going to get to learnings made via the failures, right? And you've agreed to kind of open up about the mistakes, and that's going to be great. We're going to get to that. But you were a part of that first ever, what was reputed to be the first ever Nike campaign that started in Japan that was actually then adopted for global use. So I want you to tell everybody what the campaign was, how it came to be, why it was so successful in Japan, and then why did they decide to take that global?
So, like most great campaigns, as a marketing director, I have shamelessly taken credit for something that Wieden and Kennedy did most of the work on. We had a shoe, it was in the global line. So the shoe was not made just for Japan, but it was clear it was going to do well in Japan. And at the time it was called Presto. And I would leave it to my former and current Nike colleagues that know better to tell me whether or not my recollection is correct, but I believe it evolved into what Nike now calls free. But Wieden and Kennedy came up with a campaign that really accentuated the fact that this was one of the first shoes, because it was built to be a little bit more price point accessible, and there were multiple colors. So the campaign was kind of mood rings for feet, different colors, and it was the first campaign where, in kind of shades of future internet, we had the opportunity to use NTT Docomo's iMode. So iMode was not even 2.5G. I believe it was like 2G. It was a proprietary browser that ran on your flip phone. But again, the Wieden and Kennedy team did a great job of figuring out a way to make those shoes look really good on a postage stamp sized LCD screen. The campaign worked really well. The shoes worked really well. So well, in fact, that we then later copied it in apparel, and that worked so well that Uniqlo then copied Nike. So Uniqlo then a year later comes out with its first 15 colors of fleece line. Incidentally, that campaign was also done by Wieden and Kennedy, and I think there were some shots fired. But that's how influential that campaign and that kind of string of successes with color choice in a comfortable, attractive, piece of merchandise. Again, it's compelling merchandise, attractively presented. And then that campaign actually kind of rolled into something that was adopted in the US globally as well.
Yeah. You know what they say about imitation, best form of flattery. However, when you're Nike, I don't think you care about flattery. When you're on top, you don't need people telling you, great job, you're on top. Okay. So, and then part of your stint with Nike, being the retail director for a couple of years, you then saw some massive success in those roles, exponential growth. I think I'm reading it right, culminating in 110 million USD in revenue, annual revenue, when you moved on to, more senior roles. And yet a Nike direct to consumer, online or offline retail experience is a pretty unique one around the world. I would say that if somebody took you blindfolded through a mall and then plopped you into a Nike store, you'd know within about a half a second opening your eyes that you were in a Nike store.
Yeah, I would smell it at this point. I'd been in stores for long enough that I can smell the EVA, the foam.
Well, I mean, a lot of retail, they go with scent, right? The minute you walk into a store, you're greeted with a fragrance that defines that brand as well. I mean, and hotels do it.
I still have a response. I go in and I get excited. It's odd. I know, one of my quirks.
It's tapping into a lot of emotional response pathology of, that's evolved with really driving and the culmination of those emotions that you want a consumer to feel when they walk into a store, right? What does Nike do differently in their retail presence and experiences? And what did you learn about retail in general from that environment?
First, I need to introduce this is of a kind of a fail to success. So I was initially interviewing at Nike, and at the time they were talking about wanting to build a Nike town in Tokyo. And in what turned out to be a fortunate, but at the time I called bait and switch. When I joined, they said, but we have this issue. We had all these Air Max 96s and now they're just stuck in our warehouse because we made too many. We need some help clearing merchandise. Can you open outlets for us instead? It was the job. And it was a challenge. I mean, doing a Nike town would have been a huge challenge, but needing to open outlets, open them quickly. Also, Nike had hired a lot of staff through the Air Max boom. So a lot of folks came over from the sales team to retail. And generally speaking, anywhere in the world, retail is not necessarily anyone's first choice of a career destination. If you're already right, you can empathize with them, right? If you've come in, your day-to-day job has been to go in and sell to high level meetings with Foot Locker and whatnot, and then someone tells you, we don't want to lay you off, can you go help these new guys that are starting retail? But I will say, to the credit of every one of those salespeople, they were invaluable to getting Nike's retail business up and running because they knew the product, they were on it. And so we built a team that was backed with a lot of product knowledge from that sales team coming over. And it was really that helped us really very quickly because it was when I joined, Nike had one store in Osaka Tsunami Blossom. A great core team had opened that, but it was like 3 people. But we immediately put in hired a merchandising director. We hired a head of finance. We hired a store development team, store construction team, HR team, operations team, which also oversaw all of the folks that actually went in the stores. So very quickly we were able to put that infrastructure in place and got Nike to a place where almost all of its sales were wholesale to a point, because we needed to, because we had this huge inventory overhang, to where retail was about 35% of sales. Now, because retail is, the price we sell at retail is easily double what the wholesale price is. It was quite easy, on a math basis, to go to 35% of sales, because we were getting a higher price for the product we were selling relative to the wholesale sales team. But still, it was a team effort. It happened really quickly. It happened because it needed to happen. And I'm still to this day really proud of that team and keeping close touch with all those people. And that was part of it. It was kind of like this. We realized we had a mission. It kind of felt like mission impossible. And I'm sure anyone out there that's started a new team, right? You go through that. You get the whatever office space you can get, because nobody knows what to do with you yet. And, you'll grouse about it, but then later you look back and go, man, those were the days when we were like shoehorned in that corner and no one was able to find us. And so went through all of that. And it was just an amazing experience. So I'm still delighted I never had a chance to open a Nike town in Tokyo.
Boy, I wish you'd sent me those shoes, though, back in the day. What they would be worth today.
My Asia Pacific marketing director in Portland, we often talked about, the the apocryphal or cultural tales of them, digging up the big container of like the Atari ET game out in the desert. Even then we were talking about, if we buried a container of these Air Force whatevers out in the Mojave Desert and dug them up in 20 years, we could eat like kings. We could never figure out a system to do that, but we were aware.
Oh yeah. That's a retirement package right there. And so many of those things. I mean, I just, the evolution of kicks, right? Like, yeah. I don't know when it started, and maybe you can tell me, but this shoe hoarding, this like every time new Nikes or Jordans come out, everybody's got to have them. They got to go and get them. And a lot of people I know, a lot of guys I know, especially on the Air Jordan side, just have closets full of them, unopened, never worn, just in there. They love collecting shoes. I don't know. I won't say anything about it. It's just, I never would have thought that would be a thing when I was playing basketball in the 80s in high school. Yeah. I mean, who knew? I wish I kept mine.
Well, it's, I think it's an art form, and it's of some of the first things that we begin to collect kind of, earlier in our lives. The shoe is one of the few 3D. I don't want to elevate this to, anything other than the fact that, yes, it's just a kick, but it's 3-dimensional. It's been very carefully designed. It's got style, and I think it excites us in a way that apparel also excites us, but apparel is and always will be, by the nature of how we wear it and how we build it, it's essentially a 2D product. And so with footwear is one of the first things I think that is introduced to our lives, that particularly when we get out and we're, first shopping for ourselves and that sort of thing. We're wearing it, but I don't think it necessarily hits us consciously as art, but it's collectible. It's not a figure like a G.I. Joe or something like that, but it's got that. It's physical and it's 3D, and it's quite often got a really cool design because a team spent a lot of time to figure out how to get that upper in just the right way, on that sole, and they all smell wonderful. Again, that's just me having spent too much time in a Nike store, but
it's got the cool factor. I mean, it's got that cachet that stands the test of time, and it's always going to be worth something. It's never not. I don't think. Now, to said potential failures, right? Yep. So, audience, if you have a box of tissues close by, some tearjerker stories coming. After Nike, you moved on to Sephora, where you led a turnaround and then a shutdown. Yes. Which was obviously must have been very difficult. So tell us what happened, why, and then I'll get to what did you learn and what would you do differently, if you had to do it all over again. But tell us what happened.
So in 2001, I had the opportunity to go to work for Sephora Japan. This was my first representative director, kind of like, the boss, like president job. And I'll be eternally grateful to the team that hired me there. And I was, very well mentored. And but I was the third general manager in a period of 18 months. And I probably made things worse for myself because recognizing that, I dragged my feet a little bit before finally joining. But there were 7 stores open. But the struggle at the time was it was very difficult to get local cosmetics companies to supply, because Isetan, the department store with the most to lose from a new competitor, in as much as, in essence, the department stores, and this is true of many markets in Asia, but definitely Japan at the time, the department store cosmetics floor is its bread and butter. You do not mess with the department store cosmetics floor. And we did something that I called poke the bear. The first rule of commerce and life is never poke the bear. But my predecessor's predecessor had come in and done a lot of press that read, whether he intended to say this or not, I'll just say the way the press read was, we're here, we're going to wreck the department store cosmetics floor business. So, of course, what my friend Mr. Muto and others at Isetan and the other department stores did is they called up the big suppliers here, whether it be Shiseido or smaller importers, but really important importers, because they handle skincare, which is incredibly important in Japan, called up and said, well, you can sell to Sephora, but your business will fall out a window here. Because of that, Albion wouldn't return our calls. We were lucky that Shiseido did do some work with us. Even our internal, we were part of LVMH. The LVMH cosmetics brands worked with us because they were told to, but they were less than delighted. It was a real challenge. We were in a situation where we had to survive, and we had a lot of people rooting for us to not survive. And then on top of that, we had kind of an own goal situation in that we had our own private label, and a lot of the product was fantastic, but it was, I thought, a number of us locally thought it was mispriced. And the reason we thought that is several of the lines were gathering dust in the stores. And, our planning team would go, we're getting great margins on this. It's terrific. But if, you've got to be able to, make money on this stuff. You've got to be able to sell it. We had a lot of product in the stores that was not turning. It was high margin, but we weren't selling a lot of it. And it was directly tied to the fact that we were overpriced. So the conversation we had with our planners was, we as a company would prefer to get cash as opposed to a high percentage. So do we really need to do that? And say, well, does the company pay you in cash or percentage? Well, we get cash. We like that. The company likes that too. So we agreed to lower prices. That increased our turn, increased the number of units we were able to sell. And we actually made more money at the lower prices. Most of your retailers out there will understand that, there's a classic gross margin return on investment factor going on there, where if you're someone like a Walmart and you've got a lower margin, it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to fail. It means you're going to succeed because you're going to turn your inventory over more often. And we did that. So we got gross margin return on investment. We got our gross margin dollars up. We got a couple of the stores into the black. There were a couple really big stores that were too big for us to do that. But then 9/11 came, and we were owned through DFS. And DFS had no customers in any of its duty-free stores anywhere in the world, no cash. And Arnaud and the LVMH group had to make a decision. Some businesses like the US already had over 70 stores, so it was too big to close and too big to immediately find a buyer. But Sephora in Germany was closed. I was asked to close Sephora in Japan. He sold the Phillips auction house, which I don't think he wanted to do. 9/11, like many folks, had a really big impact, on the group and on us specifically. So we spent very late portion of 2001 and then the first half of 2002 unwinding Sephora in Japan, which was a disappointment because Sephora had an amazing offer in that in one place you could get great skincare, you could get great color, and then if you wanted to also get fragrance, which is not as heavily weighted as a business in Japan, but was and still is important, you could get that all in one location. That plus a lot of other really cool things that if you're a cosmetics user were really difficult to find elsewhere. It can be humid in Japan. We sold a product that would seal your mascara, which is really important here. We sold a lot of it. So it was unfortunate because that place, went away. And I think because of the early challenges with the department stores, unique amongst all of the other markets, I don't think LVMH really looked seriously at ever opening Sephora in Japan again. In 2010, they did take one more look at it. And unfortunately, the person who was kind of leading that charge passed away. And I think that was kind of the end of that second and last look. I still personally think that anytime the LVMH group wants to bring Sephora to Japan, it'll do well. But, I think it's just been difficult, keeping in mind the need to preserve and not once again be seen to be poking the bear of the department store cosmetics floors, which are really important to the group. So.
Growing a company is hard. Doing it in a foreign market, exponentially so. The best piece of advice I can give you is not to do it alone. When you start looking at the Asia Pacific region for further expansion possibilities, and I sincerely hope you do, make sure you choose the right partners to do it with. My good friends at WPIC Marketing and Technologies have almost 20 years of experience helping brands, just like yours, enter China, Japan, and Southeast Asia. I hope you enjoyed this episode of The Negotiation, and if you're interested in being a guest or want to connect with me or any of our team, please reach out to us at podcast@wpic.co, and be sure to rate, comment, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.